I've always been interested in media that twists dark concepts and creatures to be cute or funny, and that's exactly what Grimm's Hollow does. It's an RPG Maker game where you play as a Reaper trying to bring her brother back to life. The turn-based combat is really satisfying and requires a ton of strategy. All of that, and the game is free. It's kind of insane, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's boot it up and see what it has to offer. We play as a girl named Lavender who just recently died. She wakes up and is surrounded by people wearing cloaks and skull masks called Reapers. After all the Reapers leave, a ghost tells you where to find your brother, Timmy, so you go off on your own to find him. Well, if we're going around exploring the afterlife, then it might be useful to know how to fight aggressive ghosts. So let's cover the combat. The basics of combat are simple. You have a basic attack, skills, and items. The entire thing is an action time battle system. In other words, there's a bar that fills up based on your speed, and when it fills up, you get to move. Where the game gets interesting is the enemy design. Each foe has a distinct purpose in battle, and they pretty much only do that one thing. They're always first introduced in a relatively safe battle with only 1 or 2 enemies before it's used in more elaborate ways. Once there's some enemies introduced, then that's when the fights start getting interesting. There may be one enemy who heals all the other ghosts and another enemy that protects all the ghosts. Who do you fight first? Can you outdamage the healing? You never see the same combination of enemies, and it turns every battle into a puzzle of sorts, rather than just being a test of how high your stats are. You can tell that every encounter has care and effort put into it, an amount of care and effort that I've never seen put into normal enemy encounters on any other game. I really enjoyed the variation in encounters and the creativity in them. The only real problem I have with the combat is how underwhelming the final boss is. Without going into spoilers, you can just spam one ability to stun unlock them, and even if you don't do that, then it's still an extremely easy fight. On that note, actually the entire game is really easy. The second dungeon is the only real threat at any point in the game, and if you use items and pay attention to your health, then it's really not that much of a challenge. I really wish there was a harder difficulty or some sort of super boss or something to really challenge the more dedicated players. The progression system is really interesting. Instead of getting EXP, you get Spirit Energy, or SE, which you can use on a skill tree where you either unlock new skills or upgrade your stats. What skills you get also majorly affect how you fight enemies. Like this enemy that clones himself throughout the battle, you're supposed to use a move called Slash that hits every enemy. I didn't have that skill, so instead I used an ability that increased my speed and killed them faster than they can multiply. The overall gameplay is pretty simple. There are no puzzles or anything. There are some hidden walls and you can jump over small gaps, and that's about it. But the overworld segments are still fun, simply because of the game's humor. This game is hilarious. I love how normal everyone acts in these morbid situations. You'll be having an internal mental breakdown because your brother is dead, more on that later. Then the Grim Reaper will just casually invite you out for tea and ask you what your favorite dessert is so he can get it for you as a gift later. It's a type of humor that's hard for me to explain with it still being funny. And I'm sure it's not for everyone, but at least to me, the humor definitely made the characters grow on me. Speaking of characters, the character design and art in the game is so great. The characters are just so cute, the ghosts included, and the ghost designs are specifically so creative, and sometimes even really morbid when you really think about what they actually are. And I think that's a really good description for this game's overall tone. On a surface level, it's really cute and funny, but when you start paying attention to what's really happening, then you start realizing how tragic and sad a lot of the game really is. And the music portrays that perfectly. It's slow and relaxing, but also a little bit sad. One thing I didn't even notice about the music until I listened through it for this video is how fitting the battle themes are. There are 3 main dungeons and each of them has its own battle theme. The first being upbeat and bombastic as you shred through the beginning game ghosts. Then the second is much slower and methodical to go with the amount of strategy that goes into surviving the extremely dangerous encounters there. And finally, the last cave's battle theme is very similar to the first, being bombastic and upbeat once again. Except this time it's much more serious sounding and feels much more focused. This goes perfectly with Lavender shredding through the last few ghosts in her way and acts as an amazing moment of empowerment after the second dungeon. I actually didn't like the final boss theme. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good song, it's just so intimidating, and after the other battle themes perfectly fit the tone of the previous battles, the final boss kind of felt out of place considering how easy it was. But then I thought about it more, and what if this isn't the final boss's theme and it's actually Lavender's? I mean, it would fit after all. At this point, Lavender's gotten so much stronger to the point where maybe the final boss itself is more meant to feel like a victory lap, showing how far Lavender has come, rather than meant to be an actual final boss. Well, that's just my take on it anyway. Maybe I'm just thinking way too far into it. Well, anyway, I'm going to be talking about the story now, so I suggest playing through the game before watching this part. It is free after all. Go to this timestamp if you don't want spoilers. Going from where we last left off, after exploring a bit, you eventually find Timmy and the ghost that told you where Timmy was. The ghost thinks you're trying to reap Timmy, so after taking care of the ghost, you meet up with Ghost Timmy and tell him to stay in your pocket so he can stay safe. After some pleasant tea with Grimm, you learn you can bring Timmy back to life if you manage to find his soul, which is different from a spirit, which is why he's able to be a ghost without his soul. Just don't think about it too much. We go take our first actual mission to the second dungeon with Baker, the one Reaper who doesn't reap ghosts and instead, well, bakes. At the end of the dungeon, we find Timmy's soul. Before we can do anything to save Timmy, the Baker knocks us out and takes the soul for his own. We tell another Reaper to get Grimm, and we chase after the Baker. After going through the last cave, we find Baker and fight him to get Timmy's soul back. And he barely puts up a fight. There are 3 endings you can get here. If you win normally, then Timmy returns back to life and Lavender lives a rather depressing afterlife without her brother. If you win with all your stats and abilities maxed out, which isn't hard at all to be honest, then you end up going to the afterlife as Timmy returns back to life. You then learn how they died, a little bit about their past, and how Timmy's life was after that. If you lose to Baker, which you pretty much have to do intentionally, then he takes the soul and goes to the afterlife. With the soul gone, Timmy loses his humanity, and Grimm says that he has to reap Timmy. In desperation, Lavender tries to fight Grimm, but it's not even a close battle, and Grimm ends up reaping Timmy. The only real problem I have with the story is that I wish there was another ending for beating Grimm, and that beating Grimm was actually possible in the first place. It could have been the super boss that I really wanted from this game, but it's an incredibly minor complaint and more of just something I want rather than an actual problem. So, overall, what do I think of Grimm's Hollow? Well, I think the game is amazing, and the only real complaint I have is that there isn't more of it. The gameplay is both familiar and unique with its mechanics and enemies. The characters are really cute and memorable, and the dialogue is hilarious, and all of that with a dark overtone. Like I said 3 times in this video, the game is free, and on top of that, it's only 2 hours. If you have some spare time, then I implore you to check out the game on Steam.